This is Lecture 5, Patronage, Opposed to the Independence of the Church and to the Scriptural Rights of the Christian People, by the Reverend W. H. Gould, Edinburgh, being number 5 of a course of lectures on the Second Reformation, Glasgow, 1841. Lecture 5, Patronage Opposed to the Independence of the Church. The advantage of an authoritative rule respecting the appointment of ministers might be easily illustrated, a relationship of such importance being the result of the process. So solemn is the whole transaction in itself and in its issues that it cannot be regarded as unworthy of the divine wisdom to supply us with directions concerning the way in which men are to be called to the discharge of ministerial functions. The opinion that a few general principles have been given us in Scripture, but that the precise application of them it was beneath the dignity of revelation to show, is contradicted by the fact that formal regulations have been prescribed regarding some steps in the process by which ministerial authority is conferred. We read of the laying on of the hands of the presbytery. To enter upon the discussion of any point affecting the polity of the church with the preconceived theory, tacitly or avowedly entertained, that it did not merit the honor of being expressly regulated in Scriptures, is presumptuous. The same principle, if adopted in the prosecution of doctrinal investigations, would invest with plausibility the worst tenets of neology. It tends to the disparagement of the Mosaic institution, abounding throughout with specific directions of remarkable minuteness. We have premised these observations in order to justify an appeal to Scripture as the sole arbiter in the controversy which has now prevailed in our country for centuries, with reference to the proper method in which ministers should be called to their office. An unwillingness to test the question at issue by the authority of the divine word may spring from conscientious impressions that no definite conclusion can be inferred from its statements so far as election to the pastoral office is concerned. All the stronger on that account is the duty resting upon those who entertain a very different conviction to give prominence to the scriptural grounds on which they contend, not only that extrinsic control in the appointment of ministers in the church is pernicious and unlawful, but that they should be chosen and called by its members alone. Certain complexities with which, in the course of discussion, this question has been entangled, require from us at the outset the free acknowledgment that important rights belong to church courts in settling a minister which they cannot refrain from exercising, save at the risk of detriment to the souls under their charge, and at the peril of their master's displeasure. They must deal with candidates for the ministry, be satisfied of the purity of their motives, examine their qualifications, and should a call be tendered to any one of them, they must judge of his fitness for the sphere of duty in which it is proposed that he should labor. It is their undivided prerogative to ordain, and any recourse to foreign influence by which they might be coerced into the exercise of it, so that an individual might reap the fruits of a benefice, is wholly beyond vindication or excuse. It is an Erastian act for an Erastian end. Nor is a congregation at liberty to concuss church courts into the ordination of a person deemed by them unfit, either for the sacred office or the place in which that office is to be exercised. Such a proceeding would be a violent transference of authority from the rulers to the ruled. What place, then, ought to be assigned to the people in the selection of their pastors? In some churches they have been excluded entirely from any share in a transaction so intimately connected with their highest interests. Under a system of rigorous and unmitigated patronage, they cannot be said to exercise any control in the appointment of their ministers, for to lodge objections against a presentee on account of unsound doctrine, immoral life, or deficient learning is no privilege in the matter, since it can be done by individuals not in communion with the church. Patronage, however, in a modified form, has been advocated with this provision that the church courts have power to reject the presentee on the ground of the simple dissent of the majority of such heads of families as are members of the church. The view which we feel called upon to maintain, which we deem clearly warranted by Scripture, which, when faithfully acted upon, is most calculated to promote peace and godliness in a church, and which comes to us recommended by the greatest weight of authority, is the decisions of eminent men, if the decisions of eminent men are at all admissible in the settlement of the question, is thus emphatically expressed in the first book of discipline drawn up in 1560, the era of the Reformation from Popery in this land. Quote, "It appertaineth to the people and to every several congregation to elect their minister." Unquote. The Reformed Presbyterian Church has has steadfastly upheld this principle and seized every fit opportunity to testify against the evils of patronage. In a document embodying a memorial of grievances which our church addressed in 1690 to the Scottish Estates, when they were convened for the purpose of establishing a government in the room of the abolished despotism of the Stuarts, the following language may be found, quote, "Another pillar of prelacy, the constant support of it and stop to reformation does yet continue, while this burdensome bondage of patronage is not removed, whereby the church is robbed of the liberty of her choosing her own guides entrusted with her greatest concerns." Unquote. In coming forward now to denominate patronage under any shape, and under any modification, as alien to the free spirit of presbytery, as an impediment to ecclesiastical reform, and a hindrance to the growth of godliness, and as a grievance which, so long as endured patiently and without remonstrance, stamps upon a church the guilt of treachery to Christ, no less than treachery to itself, we occupy no untrodden ground. We but renew, according to the measure of the grace of faithfulness bestowed on us, the solemn protest of our fathers, foremost after the Revolution in remonstrating against the continuance of this yoke. They had not forgotten the grievance from which their church had in 1649 experienced so brief a period of emancipation. The evils of patronage were not lost in the remembrance of even graver wrongs sustained during the Scottish reign of terror, and when an opportunity of securing its removal seemed to present itself, they were not slow to embrace it. Smarting under the harrowing reminiscences of lengthened persecution, and convinced by bitter experience of the despotism of the ecclesiastical system which that persecution was intended to establish, they condensed a volume of meaning into their denunciations of patronage, when they stigmatized it as, quote, "a pillar of prelacy," unquote.